start with is we'll quickly start with understanding a certain context in which you can actually look beyond Scrum, and implement some of the Kanban practices that we are recommending. Also, we'll try and see when we say Scrumban, what exactly do we mean? How much of it is Scrum, how much of it is Kanban, and how how you can go about using it. And at the end of the the webinar, we'll give you a quick glimpse of our product. We'll probably not go much in detail, and in case you're interested, you'll be free to contact us. So let's quickly get started and first understand most of you will already be familiar with Scrum. Probably I don't need to sort of introduce it, but it is one of the methodologies which is fairly popular, and most of you probably are already doing it. You time box the entire development process in terms of releases and sprints, and do a frequent delivery at the end of a certain time box duration that you select, and ship it to the customers. Now, there are a bunch of challenges which happen in a certain context when you use Scrum. If it works for you fairly well, nothing like it. But in a certain specific context, Scrum sort of poses some of the limitations, and we will try and address. First, let's go through those limitations or sort of challenges that teams face, and let's try and see if some solution can get right. Now, first of all, some of the basic questions probably you would have got if you've been playing a role of Scrum Master or Product Owner. You would have got all these questions from the team, or you've been imposed by some of these challenges. Now, if you've been doing Scrum, and Scrum is pretty particular and sort of prescriptive in a way that it tells you once you do your release planning, you do your iteration planning, you start your sprints, and during the sprint you have to stick to a certain rule. Report burn down in the middle of the sprint. Sort of whatever scope you start with, you try and deliver it, and at the end of it something doesn't happen, you sort of fail the commitment that you delivered, and so on and so forth. Now, one of the things which typically a lot of teams come up and say, what, a customer is now pushing us to do a very business critical feature, and we have already done our iteration scoping, but this is something that we just cannot avoid. Now, what would you do in that context? Would you take up that feature, or you sort of tell to the customer, no, right now we just can't take it, why don't you plan it for the next sprint? Now, typically in a Scrum, the answer is no. In the middle of a sprint, you can't go ahead and change the scope that you started with, and you have to sort of finish that sprint and then pick up the next set of scope, in which the customer can reprioritize the features he would like to take up. Another thing which a lot of teams face is a constant interruption, especially if you have a team which is supporting a production environment, or you're a lean startup where you're constantly delivering software, new features, as well as also trying to take care of the existing customers. Now, for example, if something crashes on the production server, it requires the entire team to work. That completely throws off your iteration planning that you did. So in a way, more or less every time you hit upon a bottleneck, which sort of throws your sprint planning out of the door, that is something a lot of teams actually come up and ask what exactly is that Scrum prescribes in those contexts. One obviously is that you sort of reduce the iteration scope and end up delivering a little lesser, but then it sort of becomes hard for them to over a period of time judge their velocity, how they're doing. Is it a good thing that has happened, whether they've sort of met their commitments or failed? That also sort of becomes one of the challenges that Scrum teams face. Another big issue that Scrum teams are facing nowadays is sort of the whole oscillation between under commitment and over commitment. In a bunch of iterations, you end up delivering much more than what you planned for in terms of velocity or iteration points. In some iteration, you completely fail up. Now, even though you are right sizing the stories, exactly the same team plays the planning poker, sizes up, you meet sort of match your iteration capacity with the story points you pick up, but still there are so many deviations. So it's sort of hard for them to figure out what is actually causing it. There could be multiple reasons, but it sort of remains one of the key challenges, especially if you're starting up new on Scrum and working out with the Scrum methodology. Another thing, if at all, let's say you are tracking your burn down and you suddenly you notice that you not be able to meet your sprint commitment, what would you do? Would you sort of go ahead and slog out and what is typically called as a mini death march? So right, you're going down, but somehow you feel that now it is going to go out. You'll not be able to sort of finish all your burn all your hours remaining within to meet the timeline, and then suddenly the entire team members slog, which again sort of goes back to our iterative days where it was Scrum was supposed to be a solution that the teams are no longer slogging, they're working in a fixed set of time happily and going after, but it again sort of becomes a mini iterative waterfall back there. So that is also one of the challenges that teams face. Another thing which sort of comes up very often is how do you improve your velocity? Over a period of time, obviously you can find out ways how you are sort of delivering better, but in case you are meeting your estimating your cards, teams also sometimes sort of becomes little bit of overestimation starts happening, and thereby just to meet the sprint commitment you end up overestimating, and no one is really sure whether the estimation that you've done is fairly accurate or not. Thereby the whole velocity metric itself is pretty subjective. So in all these contexts, typically another context which comes is the whole new startup which is struggling to find out what to build. For them, sort of fixing a iterant scope becomes very challenging because the market dynamics keep changing. Too much of time goes on in analyzing and planning all the stories together, and it sort of throws off the whole dev capacity which they can utilize. And also you end up in a frequent replanning stuff. So if you don't know what to build next, let's say you don't have a very fixed roadmap, sticking to iteration scope is also becomes sort of a challenge for the team. Now in all these contexts, something which can definitely help is what we're going to propose, which is Kanban. Kanban comes from Japanese Toyota production system days, which is nothing but a visual queue or visual board. It was used in manufacturing to indicate sort of replenishment of a inventory part, which could signal sort of pull mechanism through the whole value chain, and you end up building or delivering just exactly when you need it, and what you need. So this has been taken from manufacturing by a lot of thought leaders and brought it into software development, and they find immense value in applying some of the key principles of Kanban. And they say if you mix it along with any methodology, be it Scrum, be it iterative or waterfall, you can immediately start seeing the benefits of this methodology. A quick introduction. So typically, if you've seen the whole software development as such is moving from a very highly prescriptive methodologies, right, from RUP to XP, to a lightweighter Scrum or a very lightweight process methodology. Especially I mean it may not be applicable in all the contexts, but a lot of contexts are actually sort of demand for a very lightweight, agile or flexible methods that cannot sort of hamper the whole productivity of the team, at the same time ensure that they are delivering the product in much better quality. Now there are some key principles involved in Kanban, and we just quickly go through some of those and take a look at what they propose. And they may probably sound very intuitive and simple, because these are actually meant to be very simple, so that you don't have to undergo a complete sort of dramatic change to be able to move to Kanban. All it says is whatever you're doing, if you start visualizing your entire workflow, right from where the customer demand comes in till how you are actually working out executing those demands and delivering it. Once you visualize the entire workflow together, you start seeing bottlenecks or opportunities to improve than if you just keep working in silos and just focus on your own team or your own just part of the development value stream. That is one of the key principles that Kanban focuses. And if you have seen a lot of in manufacturing days, there were physical boards or information radiators put in plans where which will keep telling you that this is the inventory which is with the Kanban cards and queues tell you that this is the inventory which is going fast, and we sort of need to keep planning to refill those, and something which is already a bunch of cards are already lying, which means that it's not getting over and you don't need to bother much about it. The second principle which Kanban proposes is the whole limiting work in progress. Now, this is again goes back, even though Scrum sort of does a little bit of limiting work in progress in terms of how many tasks or stories you can take up within an iteration and avoids it, but within a sprint, again, a lot of people end up working on multiple cards at the same time, which sort of is discouraged. So there are theories around, which we'll talk about, Little's law, and there are various theories which talk about how multitasking on a certain card is actually bad. It doesn't help in improving the quality. Rather, it actually ends up in more of a poor quality and rework. So if you are able to limit your work in progress, the whole team can work much more faster and collaboratively, and thereby start seeing improvement even within the sprint, something that you've already been doing in Scrum. The third principle is to try and focus on the overall flow rather than just the dev or QA or some small part of the overall value stream. You try and take care of visualize the whole flow and try and make sure that the whole flow is smooth. So every time you work on a particular card, it is going through till the end, rather than you finishing off your work and then waiting and pulling up the next one. So that is another principle which we'll just quickly cover in a while. The other thing which Kanban puts a focus on is making process policies explicit. Now, anything a lot of times, even within sprint teams, even though you're working towards the sprint goal, teams are not very clear about a bunch of processes that they need to take up, or even though you could discuss in a daily sprint, but they are not focused on the overall goal of what is it that they're trying to sort of achieve. If you start making some simple rules and setting it aside with the team explicitly, you start to benefit slowly in terms of better collaboration and better communication within the team. There are various models which you can also use along with the Kanban to sort of improve the overall collaboration of the team. We'll quickly cover it, but there are a lot of principles and practices that have been taken from manufacturing days. 5 Whys or A3 or Jidoka. There are various principles that you can pick up from lean manufacturing, especially, and implement sort of in software in certain contexts, and you will see immense value coming out in your process. Now the whole question is, how do you transition? Do you need to shift from Scrum and start Kanban, or is it some sort of midway that you can do? That is something we'll try and focus. But one of the things which Kanban proposes is you don't have to sort of undo whatever you already did. Whatever you were doing, if you just implement some of the key principles of Kanban in whatever you're doing, you'll start seeing improvement. So if you're doing Scrum, continue to do Scrum. You don't need to change any of the processes that you've already sort of refined and got to a stable state. You just have to add on some simple principles of Kanban and start seeing the benefits of this approach. This is sort of more of a evolutionary approach than revolutionary. So it doesn't, for example, if you move from waterfall or iterative to Scrum, it was a complete revolutionary changes, because you ended up changing your roles, responsibilities, retraining the people in terms of how you're going to change it. Whereas Kanban is not like that. It sort of proposes a very evolutionary approach to change, and it tells you that whatever your principles or whatever practices you were doing, continue to do that. Add on some of the basic principles all at a time or one by one at a time, and keep tracking whether you're actually improving, and therefore some of these changes are good for you. If not, you're always willing to feel free to continue the way you've been doing it, and probably try something new to be able to improve further. One of the things which the first principle that we talked about is visualize workflow. Now what happens is, when you start visualizing the workflow, it helps you find problem areas or bottlenecks which are happening. So for example, if you're a Scrum team and you start with your backlog planning, probably the backlog is being planned by the product owner separately, whereas the team, once you have iteration scope, they start working on execution. Now every time, this is also a half picture, because you don't know whether the backlog is being planned at the rate at which the dev team is trying to take up the story. So, or whatever you're doing, is it going to the deployment in the same pace? So there's a whole incomplete story typically in Scrum, because even though you're working collaboratively, there are teams or silos which sort of gets built in. So one of the things that Kanban proposes is that you visualize your entire workflow together, right from where a customer request comes till how it is getting prioritized, to how it is getting executed, validated, and how it is getting deployed. You try and visualize the whole flow, and then start seeing where the delay is coming, where are the sort of wait time creeping in, so that you can try and reuse those, and thereby come to a smooth flow that a customer is requesting for a feature, and it goes through the entire value stream and comes out and gets deployed. So this is a sample, sort of a very simple visualization. You probably could already be doing it, in terms of some boards, but there are some key changes that could come up. Typically, let's say if you have a sprint backlog, one simple way to visualize itself is, that rather than taking all at a time, you visualize what is currently in progress and how much is done, and sort of you start, so that way you get to know that what are the cards which are currently in progress and how many are typically done. Once you go further, you can even build a, I mean, some of the, you could say that Scrum Board also focuses on that, but typically the key distinction is Scrum Board has a more focus on the actual development task and not on at a high level of story. So typically you would already be always be focusing on a very granular story task and saying, what, these are the 3 tasks which are pending, and I need to finish it up. But overall picture sort of at times get missing. So with a Kanban board, at least you can figure out right in one go, what are the cards various team members are working, how many are already ready, to be sort of in for QA to validate, or which are already past the QA stage and sort of ready for customer acceptance. So you don't need to typically that way you don't need to plan for even the whole at the end of the iteration to give a demo. You can always do even a sort of feature validation if it need be. The other principle of Kanban is limiting work in progress. What it says is, if you sort of visualize your workflow, even it could be very simple workflow. For example, you've seen right here, you have a sprint backlog, you have team members, various team member lanes that you've created, so that you know which team member is working on which card. You could always start with limiting their work in progress. Now, what limiting work in progress means is, you don't allow them to pick up more than X number of cards. It could be probably 1 card at a time or 2 cards at a time, so that once they are able to finish it, then only they pick up the next. What the impact it has is, if one, they will not be multitasking, because if they end up multitasking, the whole focus of doing a particular thing at a time will get lost, and there could be potential poor quality that creeps in. Also, if they if they are doing too many things at a time, there is a certain sort of spike in the next team. So if someone else has to do the QA, they will suddenly realize that what, all 5 cards are now immediately come to my queue for validation, whereas I could only process one thing at a time. So it sort of balances out, limiting WIP balances out overall, queue or flow in the system, rather than sort of causing spikes in different lower levels of the value stream. There are various theories, probably will not go, but one of the simple rules that Kanban says that what, instead of starting too many things at a time, you start putting a stop on whatever you actually pick up. So simple principle: stop starting, start stopping. So you pick up something, you finish it off, and then only you pick the next thing. Otherwise, you don't pick too many things, and you're not able to finish even one thing properly, and you build up queue for yourself as well as for other members in the lower value stream. So I mean, I already explained, multitasking, it sort of reduces the productivity rather than improving it. It adds the rework. It also reduces the probability that there will be lesser spike in the system for various other team members, so that the overall flow is maintained within your application. The whole limiting of work in progress also has a scientific evidence. So you could read up on Little's law of how the number of things in progress sort of delay the overall cycle time for a particular feature or overall in the system. So if you've been doing sort of doing 4 things parallelly, it might take up much more to for each card to get over, rather than if you picked one card and delivered it end to end and then picked up the next one. We'll probably quickly go over this to save time. The third principle, as we talked about, is managing flow. Now, this is again another sample board where sort of small variations is there. If you could see, there is a sprint backlog. Once you already have a sprint backlog, you could also do one more level of prioritization in terms of checking for whether it is the spec is complete, whether the understanding is clear with the entire team. So only one, the team lead or the product owner needs to spend time in sort of prioritizing it. Not every other team member needs to get involved. So they can keep as team member 1 finish up his story, they can simply pick up one card from the prioritized list and start working in. So there's a whole pull mechanism to it, rather than the push mechanism where each guy is being assigned a set of stories that he needs to work on, and then he finishes up and comes back again asking the project manager and or the product owner and saying what do I take up next. So this sort of implicitly builds up the queue for each team member, and they can go and pull cards and take it through. Now, one of the key aspects of this also becomes that for example, unlike Scrum, what Kanban says is if you have a sprint backlog, and since team members are not working on all the cards at a time, there is still scope that a customer could come up to you and say, what, instead of this, why don't we take up this particular story, and because this is really critical to the business and this will add much more value, and priorities have changed. There's new law that has come up, that needs to be sort of adhered to. So they still have a leeway that they can come up and say, what, since you have not picked up this particular card, let me replace it with a new one, and you try and deliver this, which is equal size. You try and deliver this in the sprint, and that will be really helpful. So it sort of gives them the whole possibility that even before something is being worked upon, you can try and change things and get much better value of that sprint, rather than fixing a sprint and you're still struggling to not probably derive as much value as you were probably wish to, probably because within the sprint also priorities could change. So this is something which also sort of is similar to a just-in-time inventory that you've heard is just-in-time story. So it helps you to get better value out of whatever iteration scope that you're taking up, because ultimately customer is deciding what is the value that he's going to derive from each story. So if he's prioritizing something, you could always pick it up because it doesn't hamper your entire overall flow. It also helps in sort of late binding. So typically what happens is a lot of Scrum team, it could be in certain contexts that you have a skill specific to certain team members and you have to pre-assign the task. But a lot of time it also becomes a sort of a habit that you have to do a whole 9-yard planning of which resource is going to work on which card, and then you start your Scrum sprint, which may not be necessary, because if you end up reprioritizing, then it's sort of at the last minute you can take up a decision and say, what, which is the next guy who's finishing up a story, and he'll be the guy who can pick up the next card that has been now prioritized with the customer. So the whole late binding helps in getting much better a value of who can do it, as well as it saves time. Unless you don't have to do a whole 9 years of planning for every sprint, and it sort of gets thrown off every time there is a change in prioritization or a change in the schedule of your own team members that way. Another key principle that Kanban focuses is you try and identify what are the bottlenecks that are building up in the system, and try and resolve those bottlenecks within the system. So for example, if you started with a sprint and you come across some story typically, and that is not clear, or there are some other issues which have come up because of which you're not able to validate it, or product owner is not available. Now you can always block it and highlight, it's sort of, you can highlight to the entire team that what, this is a critical thing. Now anyone within the team can come out and help, or customer or product owner should come over and help you resolve that bottleneck so that it can go over. A typical Scrum approach would have been that since something is not clear, we'll not even sort of pick up, or we'll just drop it for the Scrum for the sprint and pick it up in the next sprint. Whereas it says you try and highlight that bottleneck and collaboratively work with the team wherever there is a bottleneck, so that you are able to resolve that bottleneck with with the team, and make it flow better. So it definitely improves a lot of collaboration within the team, because you're no longer just working on an individual card goal that this is what you need to finish and just go on. You're working on improving the overall system, and trying to see that every card that is entering the system is going through smoothly. If there are bottlenecks, the whole teams can come together and try and resolve it much quickly than probably an individual struggling to just sort of work through that bottleneck. Now, a quick key difference that could happen, typically in a Scrum, on day one you will have a sprint backlog. In the middle of a sprint, there will be some cards that teams are working, and at the end of the last day of a sprint, everything will be in done. It sort of changes with Kanban, along with the Scrum. When you introduce Scrumban, it could be that your sprint backlog, as you're picking up the card, is again sort of getting filled. So or it is getting reprioritized. So it may be that you have limited, there are 15 cards you would do, but those cards might change, and at any day once you're done, the product owner or the customer is also free to start piling up the next sprint backlog right there. Why does he need to wait till a particular day to be able to prioritize what has to come up in the next sprint? So it sort of makes the entire flow. It sort of becomes a live board all the time, rather than something which is starting up. At the end of it gets cleaned up completely, and then you start all over again. This is another difference. So typically, unlike a time boxing, which is in a sprint or a Scrum, you typically say every 15 days you'll do a sprint, or every 20 days you'll do a sprint. Kanban sort of says that if you obviously you can do time boxing if you wish to. So Kanban has a fairly non-prescriptive approach, and saying you could continue to do. But it also says that if you want, you could also build a cadence. So for example, you could do your sprint every 2 weeks, and you do your sprint planning every week. What is stopping you to doing some sort of planning every week, so that it builds up for your sprint planning. Or you could instead of doing 2 weeks at a time, you could also do sort of retrospective on a weekly basis, so that you figure out what is happening, rather than keeping it only for at the end of the sprint and doing a demo. Okay. So it sort of brings in a cadence that you can decide your own cadence and say, what, we will do release planning every 3 weeks, we'll do iteration planning every week, and we'll do probably retrospective at the end of the week, so that we figure out what is the improvement opportunities that we have identified, and therefore work through it. So it brings in a sort of different connotation to time boxing, even though it could be little time boxing. Some of the teams which we have seen, they in fact don't even, there's no time boxing as such. They could also go saying that what, every time we have 20 cards done, we will make an iteration. So that becomes an internal iteration that could go through the next set of value stream, rather than actually waiting for a fixed time period to do go, because things might change. You might add a different card which is of higher priority, and therefore you can no longer just stick to a very hard schedule that way. Now this is a quick summary of what Kanban proposes versus what Scrum proposes, and obviously you could so if you see, some of the key points are that time box iterations in Scrum are definitely something without which Scrum is not sort of qualified as a Scrum, whereas in Kanban it's still optional. You could do it. You could always do your sprint as you were doing, but it's not necessary. You could always build a system which is where the customer is requesting, and you're working through the entire value stream, and if possible in a decent size card, you are just delivering it right then at the end of this sprint. So instead of a time box sort of approach, it also can be a feature based flow. So you could decide on a feature, implement it all through and deploy it. You don't have to wait for a particular time period to be able to deploy that feature. Some key thing is one or two key differences. You could also see that the sizing also is not very mandatory. So the whole sizing in Scrum has to be done in terms of points, whereas in Kanban it's not as much prescriptive. You track burn down charts in Scrum, whereas Kanban proposes it doesn't prescribe, but it sort of proposes that if you use a cumulative flow diagram, and we'll see it in a while, that could probably help you to understand your entire system much better than otherwise. There is a sprint backlog that you build in Scrum, whereas in Kanban everything is right up there. What is going to come next also sort of becomes visible to the entire team than just the sprint backlog that they're working on. That leads us that if Scrum is obviously one methodology, and Kanban, you could always combine the best practices from both and sort of tackle some of the challenges that if at all you'll be facing with the Scrum team. So there is no hard and fast rule that you have to sort of move from Scrum to Kanban, or just do Scrum and forget about Kanban. If you're facing a certain, as I explained the context right in the beginning, if you are a team which is sort of in one of the context scenarios that I mentioned, where you're trying to sort of questioning Scrum, that what some of these answers are not getting addressed by Scrum, and we have a specific situation where the requirements are volatile, or the priorities do change, where a new product, you could always implement some of the Kanban practices which retains this essence of Scrum, but at the same time is not very prescriptive that you have to do it exactly this way. So sort of that way you can always make a sort of your own cocktail and take up. So for example, some of the things which you have seen is you could take a release planning. Iteration planning is optional. A lot of times we know they don't do iteration planning that way, but what they do is they always prioritize, this is something what I need to do, and that could sort of change, and at the end of the sort of a prefixed time duration, which is a sprint duration, they could say, they just release whatever features they have been able to complete, and that sort of, so there is no pre-commitment sort of that you make, but actually end up doing working through the entire backlog that has been prioritized by the customer and delivering it at the end of the sprint that you sort of promised. Daily stand-up could be retained because it's a very good practice for agile teams. You could continue with retrospective. You can bring in a lot more agile engineering practice as you do. But along with that, you can just take up some of the elements of Kanban, sort of visualize the entire value stream of the entire work stream that you've been managing. You try and limit your work in progress that the team members are working on, and sort of discourage multitasking with them. Also, you could because you're working in a common visualized way, you could always pick up cards, or validate cards, or a customer can approve or accept cards as and when they get done, rather than waiting for a particular sprint to end and then picking up the next set of activities of sprint demo and otherwise. And sort of focus on an overall flow and deal with bottlenecks as soon as possible, rather than putting it under on hold till customer could come back, or till one individual can figure out what is the issue and how it can be solved. So typically, Kanban is unlike Scrum, which sort of is focused on dev. Kanban even can be used in much broader context. You could just use Kanban and the whole visualization paradigm to just manage the backlog, or to even talk to customers and prioritize how what is critical to their business, and that prioritization using a visual way itself can bring in much more value and help them sort of come out and get their thoughts crystallized in terms of what is the critical priority. Or you could even use it downstream, which is after the dev is done, the whole system testing, packaging, deployment, all of them, all through Kanban can be used for various teams. So typically Scrumban, the way we have seen the usage, it is definitely a lot helpful for maintenance work, because in maintenance work typically you don't plan sprint that way, because if a critical bug comes you have to fix it, which then throws off your sort of sprint planning, if so to say. So you could always use Scrumban, and instead of a fixed iteration scope, you can start with some high level planning, but let customer sort of prioritize some of the key features or bugs that needs to be fixed within a sprint, than fixing the sprint scope and not allowing any further changes. It is very helpful in help desk scenarios, or with the projects which have frequent sort of user stories coming up, or prioritization is getting changed, or you're developing a whole new product altogether. In that moment you're not really sure the features right on day one. You sort of, as you go, you start getting more inputs from the market dynamics change, and you could reprioritize the features and take it through. Whereas all this will not hamper your development flow, which otherwise sort of in a pure Scrum context might go off the track. So some of the key metrics that you could add up to your existing burn down charts or velocity tracking is a cumulative flow. It's a very powerful diagram which could help you just by looking at your flow. It will help you figure out what how big is your backlog. Is your backlog healthy? Are there enough stories for the next 2 sprints that you'll be able to work through? How much is a sort of work in progress that is going on? Is it over a period of time sort of increasing? That means, are you taking up too much in queues? So that means there is some level of multitasking happening. What is the overall lead time or cycle time? So the way you could also another different metric which comes from again manufacturing is you could measure the lead time, which is sort of a time a particular story took right from the customer request till you were actually able to deliver it or deploy it in certain context. Whereas cycle time is where a customer prioritized it, for example, in a sprint planning meeting, and you took it on the sprint, and how long typically it took from the sprint day 1 till day end. So that could be the cycle time. And over a period of time, if you are able to reduce that cycle time, by sort of focusing on resolving the bottleneck quickly, you will know that you are doing a much better job of managing your sprints. All right. This is a sample lead time where if you see a team, sort of the lead time for a team increase, and therefore they implemented some process changes, and over a period of time they sort of will improve and cut down the lead time to market. One of the key aspect for you to question is, if you're in an environment where each feature that you release, the early you release it into the market, it sort of can have impact on your sales. Then actually, if you think about it, in an iteration pure Scrum environment, you're actually keeping that feature in a ready state till the end of the iteration. It could be a month, it could be a fortnight, whereas that feature can always just go live as soon as it is done. Just because you're batching up things and and you're sticking to a fixed schedule, that is where ultimately you're actually causing a higher lead time than actual dev time that you could spend on that feature. Again, throughput remains. Throughput is akin to velocity, but you're sort of focusing on how many, let's say, small size cars you're able to deliver in a particular sprint or a month, and that could just become a measure that are you able to take up more cards slowly because there are less bottlenecks in the system, and therefore you are actually doing much better than simply just measuring velocity, which may, as we explained, could be smaller. Again, all this can probably lead to a much better value-based delivery. So a customer, whatever he gets much more value out of this, than just a iteration scope that was fixed. It can give much better visibility to the entire team as well as management, and ultimately bring in much happy customers or users. Now, that brings us into this this slide. We're going to take a quick tour glimpse of our product, in which we have Scrumban supported, and then we open up for question answers if you may have. Let me just share my screen and show you the product. Just give us a second. All right. So if you look at this is a sample board. There are a bunch of so typically the way Swift Kanban works is each team can come up and define their own value stream, or the whole board, a virtual board. So this whole board can be set up based on your specific value stream end to end. As we said, right from sprint backlog, or actually even to customer request to actual deployment. So you can visualize your entire value stream using our Swift Kanban product. You can plan for backlog items. So each card, you could have various types of card that you work with. It could be defects. For example, a yellow one are user stories, or red ones are defects. You could visualize whatever you're doing right on a single board, and build work in progress limits for each. For example, this one is saying that there are 4 things going on in progress, whereas against a limit of 3, so you have only 3 repairs. So someone is actually doing multitasking. So it shows up right in red and highlights you that there's some process violation which is happening. So you could define WIP limits, and based on the WIP limits, the system can alert you and indicate whether you're sticking to your work in progress limits, or actually do you need to change it because you have more capacity than what you're building up. Each card sort of represents a story or a feature or work item, and the way it works is simply a team member, as soon as they want to start on something, they can simply pull the card and start working on that particular card, and it indicates that this is so right by looking at this board, you'll be able to see that there are within the sprint there are still 6 stories which are pending. There are 3 which are already in progress. There are 2 which are dev done within the sprint. There is 1 which someone is trying to validate. There is nothing as of now ready for deployment. So overall status of the sprint, unlike burn down, which also gives you you always you can just visually take get the overall status of the sprint and see how is it working. We support a very high level. Let me just walk you through the product. We support, even though it's a visual Kanban board, we also support some level of sprint planning or release planning capability. So you can plan your releases in a very simple interface. For example, if you're planning new release, you can simply pull things from the backlog and start filling up your capacity that you have defined. Build your dates as the cards will get progressing. You will start seeing the progress of this particular release. So for example, if I want to just see in release 1.1 what was the scope, I can simply pull it up and say there are 14 cards that we delivered in release 1.1, and it was full to the capacity. Everything is done. This particular release is closed. Whereas this one is telling you that right itself you've booked your card over beyond your capacity of 60 days, and you've already planned for 67 cards. For each release, you can define iterations. So for each iteration, you could again do the same level of planning of in terms of what backlog item you want to pick it up in that particular iteration. Once you define these backlog, for a sprint, you can go up to the Kanban board and start executing that particular sprint. This is again, even though you are executing sprint, there's it's sort of for teams who don't use sprint and they want to stick to a high-level release planning, they could even do that as well. There are various visual elements that are built into the tool. For example, if you just want to figure out, so one is a visual, lanes, as I explained. The work in progress limits can be defined, and any WIP violation is highlighted right within the tool. For each card, if you look at it, there's a whole rich text editor available to define user stories. You could define priorities. There are visual indicators built in for priority, class of service. You can rank order them. You can define your estimates in days or points. Give a due date, which probably you've given a commitment to the customer, and work with this card. Working is also simple. All a team member needs to do is pull a card and start sort of working on that particular feature. And once they are done, they can simply push the card into the next queue and indicates the progress of that particular card. Each card has a set of attributes, so you could simply scroll through and see what all what is the size of the card, what is the rank, class of service, and stuff like that. Apart from that, there are a number of features. Probably will not go in detail, and we can do a detailed demo if required. You could also break down each user story in a set of tasks. If you wish to, or have a predefined task that each card needs to go through, be it dev, analysis, review. and you could track your actual or remaining hours for each of the tasks. So as you go along, there is a small element of time tracking also enabled that you can optionally enable, and it gives you a overall sprint burn down or release burn down charts as well. Apart from that, there are various features available in swift-kanban for you to manage your work. Especially, for example, if you just want to figure out when was this particular card started, you could flip this card, and it can give you the entire history of when was this particular card moved into backlog, when was it moved to the develop lane, how long what was the development time. So overall, what is the waiting time, work time, all of that can be tracked. We also allow you to filter the entire board. So for example, if you're in a daily stand-up and you want to figure out what is it that your team member one is working on. Let me just pull a different number. So the board can tell you that what this team member is working on these two cards. Again, there's a sort of violation. There are multitasking happening, but this is what the team member has already done, and this is something which is planned for it, and it tracks the detail all through. So you can have comments for each card and do a whole collaboration with your team right there. You could assign it to multiple people in case you do a pair programming. You could, it could support XP, and you assign 2 people to the same card and work with it. Anytime the team comes up, comes across a bottleneck, they can simply flag a card as blocked, and it sends out notification to the entire team and helps them see that there is something which is blocked, and the team can come together and resolve the bottleneck. Apart from that, there are the various metrics. I'm not going to getting too much into all the features, but there are a bunch of metrics that we provide. A cumulative flow diagram, a lead time, cycle time indicators. You could get your throughput. For example, you could get an iteration-wise throughput of. So, for example, if you want to figure out how many cards you delivered you delivered 7 cards in sprint 1, and and again, so there is a consistent throughput that you have been able to do. So you can measure throughput, you can measure how much is the waiting time in the overall system. So that means more or less what is the average time that the teams wait for a particular card before they pick it up for next value addition work. So these sort of metrics are available which can help you find your improvement opportunities and therefore improve. All right, I'm going to end it here and and take up any specific questions if you have, and we'll be happy to answer that. You could type in your questions or sort of raise your hand, and we can unmute you so that you can ask your questions.
And we had a question during the webinar. There was a formula for calculation. Amit K would like to see the slide again and get an explanation on it once more.
Sure. So basically, it's actually a fairly simple formula. So typically, if you have multiple things going on, so total cycle time.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I think you need to close some of your windows and move back to the PPT.
All right. Can you see my slide now?
Yes. Thanks.
Okay. So basically, it tells you that the total cycle time for a particular feature or overall in the system is depends upon the number of things that are in progress and sort of your average completion rate. So if you have 4 items in your queue that you're working on, and you could deliver 4 items per week, then your cycle time is 1 week. Now if you put too many things in progress, and you have a same average time, then it will add up to your overall cycle time for a particular feature. Similarly, if your average completion rate is too high because you end up taking up too many things at a time, therefore your cycle time will sort of get reduced. So basically, in this equation itself, it's a very simple thing. Ultimately, if you compare it with with a feature, so for example, if you're working on 4 features, and if you are able to deliver each feature independent of the whole batch size, your overall cycle time is much smaller, right? Because you took one thing at a time, and delivered it. Whereas if you work on 3 features, your overall completion time will be much lesser, because you will keep switching between the 3 feature and sort of multitask your way, and therefore you'll get much higher cycle time. So it's as simple as that.
Nitin, could you please show that slide?
I did, right? I mean, did you?
We are on the slide of Scrumban demo right now.
Can you not see it now?
No.
Just give me. We just stop sharing and go back there. Are you able to see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So I hope I answered your question. Any other questions?
I think we have a question. Okay, Amit, you have the mic.
Right. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, Amit. Good.
Okay, excellent. So there are 2 questions that I have. One is regarding the bottlenecks.
Okay.
So this is with respect to the work in progress limit of the Kanban board. So the question is that Kanban board, is there a mechanism of when there is a bottleneck, when there is a work in progress limit exceeded, the bottlenecks appears, or the bottleneck could be because of some unclarity of the story, and where the team is struggling, so they can raise a bottleneck there. So bottleneck is exactly in what context?
It is both. It is both. So one is a team can raise a bottleneck in case something is he does not have a sufficient input that he would like to, or bottleneck in general is something that you can always raise off, because for example, if you have 2 testers and you have 10 developers, and suddenly there is a queue of 10 cars that the developer needs to test, whereas so it sort of immediately tells you right there that you have some uneven capacity in different teams. So which means that the more something is waiting in dev queue, and QA is not able to pick it up, that means you're actually you're increasing your cycle time, right? The ideal state would have been that you do something, you give it to them, and the guy next which is a QA guy can pick it up, validate it, and deliver it to the customer. Right. So that is where both way the bottleneck can be visualized in the system.
See, the example that you shared is exactly something which highlights the bottleneck with respect to the number of people who can work on that. So it highlights a situation where I may have to look at that. Okay, since it is happening repetitively, I would have. It seems that I would have to increase my testers.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So that is with respect to the number of people or work in progress limit. But can the bottleneck also reflect on if there is something unclarity of requirement is there?
Absolutely. So I mean, if you're talking in tool specific, is your question tool specific to swift-kanban or in general?
In general.
In general. So definitely it could be a bottleneck. So ultimately what it says is that if you identify a bottleneck, you highlight that bottleneck to the entire team. Rather than just sort of asking the customer, and team may not be even aware. So for example, if you don't have a clarity in the requirements and you just sort of leave it between you and product owner until the product owner comes back, sort of you're stuck. You can identify this as a bottleneck with the entire team, it could be that probably someone else in the team knows about it and could help you out, right? So the whole purpose is to identify such bottlenecks and work collaboratively with the team and sort of resolve it.
Okay, that's fair enough. The second question is a simple question. In the Kanban board, is it a push mechanism or a pull mechanism? Right, means if the developer has completed the task, would he be pushing to the next stage of testing, or the tester is expected to pull it up?
The recommended way is definitely to pull it up. It also depends upon the level of maturity in the team, but ideal is the pull, because that is where the Kanban is really helpful, because once you have a pull mechanism, you're no longer depending upon other team members or your lead or your product owner to assign you something. If you are comfortable, you can pull the card and start working on it.
Okay, this question is from a perspective like of the client. So eventually, when we are implementing this board, client is the one who is primarily the product owner, one person from the client side. So they also need to be educated, or they also need to understand whether we would push mechanisms is the right way, or pull. I believe the pull is the right way to
absolutely
highlight the real problems.
Correct. Exactly. So definitely, I mean, so obviously there is a shift in mindset that is required, to go from a push-based mechanism to a pull. So you could always, one could start off, simply by having pull in certain places, and push in certain contexts where you actually know that someone is a very specific skill, and that is the only way you can get it done. So it could be a mix of both, and then slowly you actually have to probably come up to a pull mechanism.
Okay, right. Thanks. That was helpful.
Thank you.
The next question is from Richard, and he wants to know whether swift-kanban tool supports WIP limit settings or custom WIP limit settings.
Absolutely.
So if you would like to demo it, that would
sure.
be great.
So if you're able to see the screen, are you able to see the screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I mean, Kanban allows you a very flexible board editor. What you're seeing is I just went into a edit mode, and I can define my own lanes, sub lanes, which sort of depict my exact process. So for example, in your development, if you want, you can align a design lane. You could have unit testing, automation test cases, and for each of the lanes, you can always set a work in progress limit, which is as per you. So typically, one of the ways people set the WIP limit is also just double up the number of team members you have. So for each guy, you at least have a leeway that he's working on one card, and you have one more that you allow him, in case he's puts it into done, and so that he can work through. But you can keep, definitely the whole purpose of limiting WIP is that some bottlenecks arrive in the system, and therefore you exactly know where are the bottlenecks, and then you can reset your WIP limit to take care of that bottleneck, or do some other measures, so that overall you come to an optimum level where everyone is working to their capacity. So the answer is yes. Kanban allows you to set custom WIP limits. You can define custom lanes. There are various combinations of boards that you can come up with, and across various domains. I mean, we have customers using it for HR. We have customers using for IT ops. Development, recruitment, a lot many ways, because it's sort of a neutral, not just IT. It is also a very generic way, and proposes a simple visualization of the work you are doing, and some of these principles go beyond IT.
The last question that we will take up right now is from Karthik, and he wants to know what is the mechanism to track the interdependencies of tasks.
So I assume this is too specific. So in Kanban, what we allow you is, if you are aware of our digital enterprise product, the whole linking, already is inbuilt. So you can always, have a card and sort of work through a hierarchy of cards. So you can link one story with two dependent stories, and unless two are done, so the overall progress on the top is not visible. So you can always view links within multiple cards and set it up, or you can even set up a traceability link saying that these three bugs are linked to this particular story, and therefore you always take care when you are actually executing your board.
And this is the question was specific for tasks.
Okay, so in to-do list, typically dependencies we've not sort of come across a dependency, but in case what we allow is we let you define the task in a specific sequence, and unless we have some additional plugin rules that you can set up. So for example, if you have 2 tasks specific to this particular develop lane, and then you have 2 tasks which are for QA guys. So unless these 2 tasks are done, the moment someone tries to pull the card to a done queue, we sort of give alerts to the user saying that you have to mark your task as done. Unless without that, it is not advised to sort of move the card. So there is no explicit dependency, so to say, but implicitly you can always build dependencies by way of business rules by which which allow you to sort of take care of that dependency. So for example, if you see there's a policy which says that alert team members if the cards are moved without task closure. So if a dev guy tries to move the card to a QA and without finishing up his work, or there are 2-3 tasks that he was supposed to finish but he did not do it, the system prompts him that you're supposed to finish these to-dos before you move on. I guess did I answer your question? Any further clarifications on that?
I think we are done with the questions.
All right. I think then probably we'll end it here. Thanks a lot for your time. We'll in case you want to know more, or you have any questions regarding Scrumban or swift-kanban as a tool, feel free to reach us out. Let me just share the contacts at the end. So the bunch of things you could do additional reading, and we can always share these links. There's good amount of discussions going on Scrumban and how people are using in different contexts. You can visit our website, and there are resources section which has a bunch of good links to various blogs of various thought leaders. Also, you can just drop us an email at sales@digitide.com in case you want more information about Scrumban or swift-kanban product. All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to talk to you guys again. Thank you.